again, this is going to be so hard because there's so many entrenched interests and like the sort of the metaphor is like so many hands in that cookie jar that sort of like what
Yes.
Sportster wants to do is cut off all the hands.
Yeah.
Be very, very
Is
clear. I just
that
want to
how's
cut them
that
all off.
is it does it make you very popular? Hey, what's up, everybody? GP13 here. New episode of the Risk Takers podcast. This is a very exciting episode. I'm joined by my friend Alex Kane from Sporttrade. We've been DMing a lot on Twitter, and I'm really been following him in the project he's been developing over there, which is a sports betting exchange. So I think that there's a lot here that's going to be like really indicative of how the industry will progress. And Alex is definitely one of the people pushing for what I would say is like the right type of change in the industry. So Alex, welcome to the podcast.
GP, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Why don't we start off? By just giving a brief little rundown of who you are and what Sporttrade is, because I think that will color a lot of the discussion.
Yeah, so founder and CEO of Sporttrade, went to school in Philadelphia, which is where we're headquartered as a business. Was a business law and finance major, and someone put Robinhood in my hands, the app, the trading app, and I thought that was really cool. Like we were learning about how to look at the present value, future cash flows of a company, and come up with a valuation. And there was like this ticker, I remember at Drexel, like this huge ticker at the LeBeau building where like you'd see like Raytheon and you'd see like a pixelated little logo, $83.44.
Yep.
It'd keep, and I thought that was really cool. Like that, you could sign up for an app. It was all digital. Like before then, like even in our lifetime, like our parents had to go to a physical Charles Schwab location to like open up a brokerage account. And obviously
Terrible.
incredibly expensive, terrible process. And I think what was so great about Robinhood was like it was all just instant, it was easy, it was slick, it was fast, it made sense. And I thought to myself, I want to build that for sports betting. And I couldn't even define what that was. It's sort of like it
Yeah.
when you see it. Like I opened up E-Trade, no offense to E-Trade, amazing business, and you open up Robinhood, like you just say, oh well, 9 out of every 10 people are going to you choose this one. And that's sort of what I wanted to try to build for sports betting. And like the underpinning of that was obviously to build some sort of exchange like mechanism, borrow these sort of concepts and technologies from financial markets, to build an experience where you always got the best price for all of your bets, and that those bets had a fair liquid value throughout the lifespan, where you could both assess the live value in what we call like a portfolio, Robinhood calls a portfolio, but take action and say, I bought here and I want to sell here. And so we ended up building was like this probability based system where every outcome on our platform settles at 0 or 100. And it's very similar to a traditional sports betting sort of experience from like a high level. But what's very unique and differentiated is that the prices are very, very tight. It's very transparent to see how much you can get down at any one point. We don't have like a spinny wheel, so like when you place a bet, it goes right through. And then what I think is the most like fun and exciting part, particularly for golf and golf outrights, is like the concept of like, well, if the market's going to be tight the whole time and I have near 100% uptime, I can start to buy things at a low percentage odds that I don't think are actually going to win, but I think are going to go up. And if that spread stays tight, then I can start to think about betting like the way I think about buying Raytheon back in whatever 2017 as a Drexel grad. And that is, I'm going to buy low and sell high.
Right.
And so that's what Sporttrade is now. We're a licensed online sports betting operator. Um, had no clue what I was doing when I started, and I like to say like I have incrementally more of a clue now, but still learning a ton. We're live in 2 states. We're hoping to get live in a few more states this year, and we have a growing group of customers that I think really love the product. And by virtue of being a smaller and scrappy operator, we've really leaned into the customer and allowing the customer to sort of dictate our roadmap. And I think it's one of the things I'm most proud of is like how involved, the executive team and many here are like with the customer in helping sort of define the roadmap. What should we list? What new products to sort of develop? And I'm very passionate about this, as you probably could tell. So I really enjoy what I do. So that's a bit about me and the company.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to I want to so actually the first it's actually very interesting because I actually kind of forgot about this, but a while ago you had come out and I thought you handled the situation incredibly well, which was a situation that involved Spanky and Bally's and playing on your platform. And I remember you were put in a pretty awkward situation, but you were very like upfront with Spanky and the whole situation. And I messaged you on LinkedIn. I actually have to go back and find out. I was like, hey, I don't, I never, we had met. I was like, I thought you handled that really well. It was a terrible spot to be in. And it was like the first time I thought I saw an operator kind of go out of their way to engage in discourse with the bettor. I've always felt like there's this wall, and the wall is often customer service reps that sit between the operators and the bettors, and there's no conversation. So there's this like naturally antagonistic relationship that just gets like stoked because there's no conversation. But now I've seen you, Jeff Benson, engaging on Twitter with bettors, like, and you're saying you're pro customer, like how much of that engagement drives your kind of the thesis behind Sporttrade and like being actually in the room with the customer?
Yeah, well, first of all, I really enjoy it, and I think the takeaway for anyone listening is like, um, sort of going back to my Drexel days. So I sat there and I was like, I'm going to build this exchange, and like Coinbase was really up and coming back then, and that was sort of the thing. It's like you're going to build the broker, right? The mobile app that sends the order. You're going to build the exchange and the clearinghouse, and it's going to be vertically integrated. Because that's the way you have to build a business in online sports betting. You can't you maybe we'll talk about this later, but there is no true U.S. equities market structure yet, which would be even better for the customer. So I sat there and I was like, okay, I build this exchange. I'm like, shit, like, how do I start? Like, how? All right, I'll build the exchange first. Okay, how do I do that? Like, I'm looking up at that ticker. There's Raytheon
Yeah,
scrolling
yeah,
by
yeah.
$84. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm a finance major. I just graduated from the school. What does that $84.31 mean? And I started to think, well, that's the present value future cash flows. No, but technically, how did those numbers get up on that screen? Is that like the price that you can buy Raytheon? Is that the price that you can sell Raytheon? Is that the price that someone just bought or sold Raytheon? And I ended up taking this sort of, I wouldn't call it a detour, but this progression to how to build essentially electronic marketplace, which ended
Yep.
up being exactly similar, exactly identical to the way you built the NASDAQ, to the point where the individual, his name's John Ross, that built the NASDAQ matching engine, built our matching engine.
That's awesome.
It's the same thing. But so why this winding story? Like, why did I go back to Drexel? What I learned was, when I thought about the idea, I was like, well, this is great. You're gonna get all these people and they're gonna sort of be betting against each other. And that's how the stock exchange works. And what
Yep.
I learned is that an exchange is only as good as its liquidity,
Yep.
and the liquidity can't come from individuals. It's too fast, it's too industrial, it's too
Yep.
methodical. It has to come from companies and machines, and those company
Yes.
machines are called market makers, and market makers are there to provide both a buy and a sell price. In sports betting parlance, you can bet either side, the yes or the no side, the home team or the away team, the over or the under. And I think what's unique about Sporttrade is that Sporttrade's biggest two market makers are its biggest two investors. And so now, back to this sort of Spanky situation, it's it's not that Sporttrade as an individual company is extremely pro player. It's actually more than that. It's the collective group of employees here and employees at both market makers that have this collective vision that we all want to drive down the cost of the sports bet, and we
Yes.
all want to put the customer first. And it is just like extreme luck that I'm in this position. I think in a lot of ways, like to be in a position where it's, and again, like that Spanky situation, it's like, well, it's very easy for an exchange to say we accept all players, but okay, if you think about, well, exchange is only good as the liquidity, and the liquidity comes from the market makers, the question shouldn't be, does the exchange accept all players? It's sort of a meaningless question, isn't it? Isn't the question, do the market makers accept all players? And Spanky knew through the process, he got to know one of our market makers really well. The market makers were like, look, we are going to lose to this guy, but it is so valuable for us to have him come to the cage and use the product, and talk about his experience. He was 100% going to beat us. He beats every sports book he plays in. That's not a question. It's for him. That's not even the hard part. And so the overall point I'm making is that people should think about Sporttrade not just as an individual business that has this vision, but a business backed by liquidity providers that also have that vision. And once you have that, it's sort of you've cloaked yourself with this sort of way of thinking, in French, a raison d'être, a reason for being. And now back to your original question, why do we interact with players this way? It's like, I'm fairly positive that every decision we make when it's behind closed doors is the best thing for the consumer. So it's very easy for me then to open the door and explain it because there's absolutely
Yeah.
nothing to hide.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's the ethos difference, I think. Like, and I
For
talked to a lot of
sure.
sports books and sports book operators, and they were like, this whole thing's it's a farce. It's your market makers are trying to pick up as much value as possible. And like, maybe we talk about it today, maybe we don't, but like some of the technology we have, some of the things we do is like so pro player. And it all comes back to that singular vision. We want to put the customer first. We want to drive down the cost of that sports bet. And so it's really a strategic partnership between the exchange and liquidity providers to do that. And that's what it makes it so easy to interface with people, because doesn't mean our decisions are always correct, but it's very easy to sort of explain the logic, even in a
Right.
very public and nuanced sort of setting like Twitter.
Totally. And you brought up my first question about structure. And the first thing I want to highlight is was the market makers and the idea that Sporttrade, because what do we see on Twitter in our feeds? We live in a small bubble, but it's a bubble of people that generally win sports betting and generally get limited. So when I think about Sporttrade, I think about the market makers. The market makers, like you said, are the people that would be kind of tired of sharp action if anybody were to be. It wouldn't be Sporttrade. That's exactly right. Now, when I think about the market makers, I'm like, okay, well, like, are they accepting of sharp action? Like, truly, or is that like part of the agreement or whatever? It's like you have to fill orders, or how have you talked to them about potentially taking on toxic order flow like Spanky, or like whoever comes off the street and just wants to bet what they deem to be good spots and are winning long term.
Yeah, so they both of these sort of market makers have signed an agreement with us to provide liquidity on the platform. They're licensed as service providers that with
Okay.
sort of the highest level of license. Same thing I was just explaining to you about our state 3 and filling all
Yes.
that stuff out. They do the same thing from a business perspective and from a key employee, key holder, it's called,
Right.
perspective.
Right.
I think it's I'd say a couple things. Like, one is the market makers are helping to build this business by virtue of exchanges are only as good as the liquidity, and they are providing the liquidity. Okay, so we all sort of agree we're building this business together. Fine.
Right.
Now,
Because
Sporttrade
they're
is
partners because they're partners kind of in the business.
they're
So they
partners in
have
the
like
business.
long term incentives to do a good job in general.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
So we've created a structure where there's alignment from a equity perspective. They are on our cap table.
Yeah.
This is something that a lot of almost every equity startup exchange does, or non-equity. Like Memex is a great example. Where like, okay, you're going to go try to beat Nasdaq and New York Stock Exchange.
Mm-hmm.
What you sort of think about is like, wait, I need to get the brokers in the room.
Yeah.
I need the institutional brokers. I need the retail brokers. I need the market makers. And like Memex, the members exchange, was what it's called. That's why it's called Memex. Was it brought all the members together and gave them all a strategic reason and alignment to drive success and drive flow to Memex. And Memex now, I think it's in like the mid to high single digit market share, which is
Wow. For
which
an
means you're
exchange, that's
insanely
crazy.
profitable.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
To sort of, because you have such incumbent sort of strategic advantages for Nasdaq and for NYSE. So okay, they're helping us build this business, and you sort of recognize like, okay, any new sports book that launches in any state, what are the first 1,000 players that come every time? The sharpest of the sharp.
Toxic.
It's just sort of
People you don't
that's just
want. Yeah.
right. That's just the virtue of, and then so that's like it comes with the territory. The second thing I would say is like it's less of like us wanting to book to only that player long term, and more. And you hear a lot of companies say this. Um, Prime says this, and Circus says this. I think the view we take is like, of course, you want to book to every single player. Like you build all this technology and you put all this blood, sweat, and tears in your business, and you sort of market it. Like, of course, there's never a customer you'd say no to, especially if they're a Square player. Um, I think the better question is like, do you have a product and experience that you could rationally and reasonably say can attract that player from an
That's a great
onboarding
question.
perspective, right?
That's a great
Onboarding,
question. I had that
payments,
question before you teed up. It's like I see why a sharp would want to hop on and play
right?
with the market maker because we're all very wary of just like having short account longevity, and to have that kind of removed from the question and we just focus on pricing is great. But like
Right,
what's the flip side? Like
right.
where are you seeing the recreational? Because there must be a difference between like what attracts me to a platform than what attracts like just a bet on the weekends recreational.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things like, and you are totally right to ask this question. This is like there's a gaming consultant and industry expert. His name's Alan Bowden, and
Okay.
and he basically, I'm paraphrasing, but I think it's brilliant. Like the best sports books in the world are the venues that have a way to attract happy losers, right?
Yeah.
When we were just talking about this before the pod started,
Yeah.
all the revenue comes from losing players in the form of commission, in the form of losing to market makers. It doesn't matter. In the form of placing a same game parlay on DraftKings and losing, right? It comes from those players. So long term, to be able to go beyond that sharp audience, happy losers. Okay, happy losers. That is a totally different way of thinking about building a sports betting
I like
app,
that.
primarily for sharp players, because sharp players aren't generally happy losers. There are, the third point I was going to make to your last question, there are definitely spots where sharps are happy to lose. And what I say when I say lose, I mean give back edge of, oh, I think this thing is
Yeah.
truly worth 53. I'll buy it at 53.5 because I'm hedging that ESPN bet promo.
Sure.
And so we have
Yeah.
a lot of those instances where customers are happy to lose because they can find pretty dang near close to midpoint liquidity.
Yeah.
ESPN bet promo being a perfect example. We're like, okay,
Oh
you're the
yeah.
best price in the world. You're letting me bet Houston plus 10.5 at, you know, whatever it was, minus 105. And the true point, I think, true midpoint's like minus 103.5, minus 104. So I'm paying a little bit of edge, but I was just able to get $100,000 down on
Dude,
ESPN, and like,
we should go over the actual, because this was a good moment for both you and Profit, because you guys got a lot of exposure on Twitter, and I'm sure you got a lot of action. And I don't know if you want to go over the ESPN bet, uh, the Ravens and then the Chiefs situation, and then explain like kind of how that might have highlighted like a use case for you amongst, like, I would call them like the arbitrage community, right? Like
yep,
that's, which is a huge client of yours, I'm sure.
yeah. In short, ESPN decided to have an uncapped promo for a main market, and that main market was, I think they were boosting Houston plus 9.5 from like minus 110 to plus 110,
Plus
and then they're
110, and then you could
and then
get
with us.
minus something else to like plus 140, I think.
Right. And then
Yeah.
Houston, they were boosting Houston plus, or I would say they're boosting um the 10.5 as well.
Oh, that's right.
And
That's right. To
and so
plus
you could do,
140. Right.
yeah.
Right.
So you could essentially, we're offering like the best price in the world on the Ravens minus 9.5 and minus 10.5. And I
Yeah.
think their minus 10.5 price was like plus 140. And, we woke up on Saturday, this was like 2, 3 weekends ago, and just basically, again, that strategic partnership, that's where it really showed. It was like the
Yeah.
market makers got there and said, all right, quarter million's there. And like, we're offering it at like what we don't even think is value. So once the commission is baked in, it's just essentially a marketing sort of like, we're invested in this exchange,
Yeah.
we're invested in this. And so that ended up being really great for us. And customers were depositing and new players were coming in and betting the, Houston plus 10.5 with us because we had the best price in the world, and Houston plus 9.5 with us because we had the best price in the world. We even had some player that was a VIP with us who basically said, I somehow have $300,000 of potential return on ESPN. So whatever, risking 125 to win 175 all in blended across the two bets. In sports trade parlance, we call that he had 3,000 shares. A share is $100 potential return.
Got it.
100 times 3,000 is
Yep.
300,000. He came to us during the game and said, "What can you do?" We got the market maker on. We have this product called Liquid Boost, which is like a
Yep.
brokerage style product, RFQ style product, where you can say, "I want to bet a lot more. What can you do?" And like during a timeout in the first half, customer was able to get down $40,000 on um, on Houston minus 9.5 or Houston plus 10.5,
Yep.
and the comeback for him was like minus -08. So like he was offered a plus 100 minus -08 market during the game
Yeah.
for $40,000. And
Unheard of.
that's the level of sort of liquidity that we think we're going to need to get sort of beyond, have that exit velocity, right? Not just the super price sensitive player. So yeah, that's how that whole thing went down, and it was great because
Great. It's
the
crazy situation for uh I think to real like I was like, oh man, this is immediately. Well, first of all, I'm happy that me and your market makers won a lot of money on that game. So that's good because the boost or wait, the market makers got rinsed.
no, the market makers won because they
They took
were
the
they
hedge
took the
out
Ravens side.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
Okay, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
didn't.
ESPN bet lost,
That's right.
and customers on the net. I think we did some math to figure out how much, like somewhere in the $40,000 range. Like we just took
Yeah.
all the trades we did on that day and
Yeah.
assumed they. We actually had an interesting, and it sort of gets back to your last point on like the price insensitive flow. We had a
Yes.
customer in the middle of all this. um, it was great. I mean, in the middle of everyone taking,
Yeah.
the Houston side, I think it was 9.5. Customer came in and said, "I want Baltimore minus 9.5." The first thing we say is like, "Go
Go to
hit it at
ESPN, right?
ESPN,"
Yeah.
which sort of
That's
shocked
nice.
people.
That's nice of
Um,
you.
and he says, mainly sort of an AC player, and plays like mainly offline, like doesn't really play on the
Yeah.
online apps. And ESPN doesn't have a place where you can deposit anywhere. Penn doesn't have any place you can deposit
Yeah.
anywhere in Southern Jersey. You got to go up to I think it's called the Freehold Racetrack, and they have a cage there, and they're still actually changing their machines over from Canby to the Score Tech. So it's unclear if they even have a
Gotcha.
cage. And so that was an example where like that customer got like an insane price as
Yeah.
well. And so kind of goes to that point around like, okay, when you're building the business, it really only can become a super viable business if you're bringing in the non-price sensitive players. And I think we're already doing that to a degree. And I think it goes back to the point of, okay, you got to think about that customer, they're going to be a bit more fickle than, okay, you have the best price or you have the best liquidity. And it starts with, can I use Face ID to log in? Is there Venmo and PayPal deposits? Is it an
Yep.
app that sort of speaks to me? Um, is it native? Can I swipe back and go back a screen like I can on Uber or
Yeah.
Instagram? And I think we've got that sort of, we're on that path, and I think a lot of people can look at the app and say, okay, it looks a little bit different, but it's got those sort of intangible sort of qualities that make that sort of underpinning. I think we have more work to do, as part of, we want to get to that sort of customer at some point to really have a USP outside of price, outside of quality of execution, that can bring in the sort of player that is going to sort of just be totally price insensitive and not really care that the prices are great.
They
Um,
just like the app.
just like the app. I mean, it's going to take us time, and I think we've learned a ton. But like, there's so many features that we're delivering that are like very different, and I think again goes back to like making sports betting the way we think about it more of a community, more of an experience as opposed to just purely transactional. And we just borrow a lot of those concepts from like what Robinhood does really well, or what Coinbase does really well, what eToro does really well. And who knows if any of them are going to work? But I think one thing is definitely true, and that is they're different, very
Yep,
different than you would look at a Caesars or a FanDuel or a Fanatics.
totally. I I'm trying to figure out like how to phrase this because it seems like you have a reason for doing this like outside of making money. Is that fair? Like it feels
That's
like you have like you want to see some positive change.
yes,
Yeah.
100%. It goes back to that raison d'être thing. The
Yeah.
reason of being like I was asked to do something like teach a course at Drexel, which I'm doing later this week, which is going
Oh,
to be so
cool.
fun for
Cool.
sports betting because Drexel actually is a very sort of business forward school and realizes this is going to be a huge industry for years to come. And why not create a curriculum around it, which is what they're starting to do. And one of the questions is like, fill out this questionnaire or whatever. And it's like, what's one quote about you and how you feel about your profession? And I'm like, all right, this is incredibly corny, but I feel like I was put on earth to do this.
I love it.
And it that sounds incredibly immature, probably of like, wait, really? Online sports betting? Like, I just think that when you look at the capital markets and you look at the whole ecosystem of all of these participants, particularly the retail participants, because again, all the money in financial trading comes from losing traders, just like all the
Totally.
money in sports betting comes from losing sports bettors. And then there
Yeah.
ended up being this like incredible divergence of like the protection that retail traders should have versus the protection that retail sports bettors should have. And to
Yep.
me, like we'll have been successful if we can move the world towards it. Hopefully, it's something like an epiphany because I speak to a lot of people and they're saying, it's better. It's a vice. They don't deserve any protection. I'm like, really? So they should get treated even worse because what they're doing is a vice. Like it's a financial transaction. Like we all do it. A lot of us do it
Yeah.
for fun, but it's still a financial transaction. By the way, 80% of the people that are ripping orders on Robinhood right now, probably more on the fund end of the spectrum too,
No, that's investing.
right? But like they get this amazing customer protection of like that order is going to be executed at the NBBO and like
Yep.
we have visions of like that's how the US should work, right? If you're betting any sort of main market or alternate line or anything that's somewhat liquid, if you're betting, I'm looking here like I don't know, Wake Forest is offered at 53% odds, which is minus 113 to beat Georgia Tech on Sporttrade, but it's 52 for at Circa. Like, I'd love to be able to take that order and be like, you know what? Here you go, Circa. You're offering a better price, right? Like, why
Yeah.
wouldn't you want that sort of experience? So I do agree. Like, I am sort of here to do this, and that thing is to improve the execution quality of players and to reduce the cost of the sports bet. And I would measure my success based on like from a macro perspective, the market trending that way. And I think Sport Trade's a vehicle to help me do that, but
Yep.
it's bigger than Sport Trade for sure.
Yep. Yep. I love it. And I think so. I feel generally the same way about the space. I have a fondness for the space. And like you said, like being put on earth to do this, like for a while when I was playing poker, I always felt like, oh, poker's bad because it's a zero sum game, or gambling's bad because it's a zero sum game. I have to go, I have to go do something with my life, make a positive impact. But like I kept coming back to the fact that I love this industry. The people I look up to are, Phil Ivey, Doyle Brunson, Billy Walters,
Mhm.
and that's fine. I eventually just said that's fine. And I want to do the best I can for this industry. You don't have to go do what everybody, as long as you go do something like with good intentions and you enjoy what you're doing like that.
Mhm.
Eventually I just accepted that was fine, and I want to see this industry do well. And I think it's on the back of like, it can't be, there's just too much bullshit. Like,
Mhm.
and it, it just can't continue like that. And to, there has to be some intangible benefits
Right.
of having Sporttrade, having Circa, who say, hey, person who wins, here, come on in. You
Yep.
hear Jeff on Twitter, Jeff Benson from Circa, come in and say, hey, thanks for being a customer. To even like people who are being dicks and sharp bettors. And I feel like there's just some like unseen advantage to the industry operating like that can't be quantified. And people are taking the retail books that are like operating in a very underhanded way are taking a shortcut that like won't work long term. I don't know.
Yeah.
Those are my thoughts.
I totally agree with that. Like, I think I take the view that sports betting for a ton of people is it's sort of the reason why it was like regulated, and the reason why iGaming is never going to have the success of online sports betting is that like any legislator is going to be like, yeah, I watch sports, and like, yeah, I heard they talk about the spread. They may even do it themselves. The amount of
Yep.
people I've met that are legislators that are already betting, even though it's not legal, like
Do you
they're
track their
normal. Those
votes? Be
people.
like, wait, why did you vote this
No,
way?
and like even like regulators that just say like they're betters themselves. Like these are normal people, right? I think the view that we take is like it's never going anywhere. Like people go out to the movies, right? I love going
Yeah,
to the movies, and there's
me
a
too.
cost of the entertainment, and that cost is the $15 for a ticket and the $10 for popcorn and a soda. I sit there for 3 hours and I sort of suspend my disbelief and I enjoy the movie. Like I'd say like myself as a sports bettor, like I think everyone is on a it's you're not specifically anywhere on the sharpness spectrum. Like some days you can wake up and say I want to try to shop on price, and some days like I wake up and say like I want to bet on the Eagles, like I want to get the best price. I'm
Yeah,
going to bet on the
but you're
Eagles
betting on the
today.
Eagles. Yeah,
Right. And so I think like that being the vast majority of where the revenue comes from, I think again getting to this point of like the way Circa and Prime and Pinnacle and Chris
yep,
and Novig
yep,
and Profit and Sporttrade
yeah,
and STX, like we just want to drive down the cost of that entertainment for this person that wants to get a great price. And I think that runs very contrary to the add the 19th leg to your parlay, or let me not
yeah,
do a straw man. Add the sixth leg to your parlay for another
yep.
25% profit boost. It that's so different than that. That's let me increase the cost of entertainment and lower the sort of lifespan of this player. And for us, it's the opposite. It's like let me extend the lifespan of that player because everything else that's going to be coming, secondary to that. Maybe they go to more games. Maybe they watch more on TV. Maybe they get more involved and buy like ancillary products. Like so, I think there's I don't know. That's just the view that we take, and I do believe that's like the more mature approach.
I agree. I agree. And it's like you have to build it on a solid foundation of transparency. Like I don't I don't I don't see how these books think it's like I don't know. I do think there was it's some of it's systemic, some of it came from uh probably overspending on advertising and trying to make money back to show shareholders, it wasn't a total failure.
Right.
Uh, sure. But at the end of the day, I look at that group that you just mentioned, and I think like yes, those are the people that I would want being the face of our industry, talking to the legislators, talking
Yep.
to consumers. I still like you don't have to I'll, don't have to weigh in, but I don't want it to be Jason Robbins. Sorry, like
Mhm.
that's not who I really think needs to be leading the industry, because I want this to last for 30 years, not for 5, and then get embroiled in. I mean, today DraftKings huge kind of blow up on this VIP guide between DraftKings and Fanatics, and it's
Yep.
it's like we're playing from behind. People already
Yep.
view sports betting as like shady. Like we don't have these scandals to spare. We don't have
Right.
whatever, like the unit scandal. We don't have the DraftKings VIP thing. Like we don't have many of these left. So it's
Yep.
like I love to see what you guys are doing because I hope that I don't have to work. Like I don't want to have to, sit down at Thanksgiving every year and like have it be progressively and progressively more awkward that that I'm a professional sports bettor, and the
Right.
the more bad players in the industry, the worse it's gonna get.
Right.
So, but I
Yeah.
want to talk about profit. There's two things I want to talk about. First, I want to talk about profit and Novig. These are two other exchanges, and I'd like to hear your opinion. I mean, you clearly think of them in a high light, as to mentioned
Yep.
in that in that group. And there's multiple. There's obviously multiple exchanges that operate in the financial markets.
Yep.
And I do think there's some benefits to it. Like it creates more arbitrage opportunities and there's like a lot of volume and it brings more customers. Like, do you see a multi exchange future? I don't know. I don't want to like paint you into a tough spot with,
Right. Right.
those companies, but it does seem like you have a high opinion of them. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I think there are. I was on a panel at G2E, the Global Gaming Expo last year. It'd be really great to get to see you at a lot of these more events this year. GP, I'm
Yeah,
like
yeah.
looking forward to meeting
Yeah,
you.
I'm gonna for sure.
Um, and I was on a panel with Kath and Jack and others, and the question came up. It was like, what is a sharp better, right? That was the name of the panel. And like, someone's like, why, we should mandate these books have minimum bet limits.
Hmm.
And uh, this is not a political statement. This is more just a view of how I think things efficiently operate. I think that in a lot of ways, marketplaces and competition can solve a lot of issues. Some areas that
Agreed.
it doesn't.
I agree.
But this would be an area where marketplace can solve the issue, and it's less of like, let's make DraftKings always accept $1,000 on everything from everybody or some
Yep.
number. It's actually a structural question of like, how do we allow businesses that want to offer that experience to players, the names I just mentioned, right, and countless others. Someone listening to this podcast wants to start a sharp
Yeah.
sports book right now, like I would count them as well. How do
Yep.
we lower the competition, um, make more reasonable licensing requirements, allow more vendors to get into this industry that can drive down the cost of revenue for businesses like Sporttrade? Because once you do that, you've now enabled more competition. And guess what? The customer's wallet's going to choose that over time, when if ever Pinnacle comes to the US or Sporttrade,
Yep.
gets into more states, customers are going to decide with their wallet whether that's better for them. And that's a better situation. It's a better way to solve the issue than to say, DraftKings is going to mandate that you have to have minimum bet limits. It's
Right.
not going to solve anything. Guess what they're going to do? They're
Yep.
going to stop listing a lot of the fun stuff that a lot of retail people like. And
For
people
sure.
like that.
For
And so,
sure.
so I think that's like such an easy answer. Like it's like people sometimes I maybe am super naive, and I think you have to be sort of unrealistically naive and stupid
That's a
to be an
good point.
entrepreneur. Um, Paul Graham said that, and then he said like you could end up surprising yourself, but
That's
you
true.
overestimate
Yeah.
your
It's like,
abilities, and then you underestimate looking back what you could have achieved, sort of thing.
yep.
So what my view is like competition is great, and then what I would say about like Sport Trade and Profit and Novig is like I think exchange ends up being this very, I won't say very toxic, but somewhat toxic word because people assume they know what that means. And like just me,
Yes.
I'm even still learning what that means. Um, I would say I wouldn't want to speak for those companies. I would say Sport Trade is less an exchange, and it's more a technology company that
Yep.
that tries to connect players with the best markets in the world. And
Yep.
sometimes that's with central limit order book. Sometimes that's with interesting technology that we've delivered and customers really like. And ultimately, we want to do things like parlays and having RFQs, and those aren't really exchange things either. So I'd view
Right.
us more as like technology companies that want to deliver every
Yeah.
sort of type of sports bet just in a higher quality way. But then to your question of like, can the market support it? Like my honest answer is in a lot of states, no.
Yeah.
Um, and I would
Fair.
probably extend that to most states, no. And again, it gets back to that cost thing. It's because the underpinning costs of having to, pay a casino each year to operate and choose from a list
That's
of
right.
payment vendors. When I
Right.
have a friend that works, my brother-in-law works at Stripe, and I hear what regular businesses cost to transact money and what
Gambling.
us sports books pay to, and it's not even if we're taking all of the counterparty, it's not even the same cosmos. And so I think it's like structurally, I would love there to be a world where there's like the US, there's 13, lit books right now. The US 13 approved, SEC approved exchanges right now. And if there were only one, the cost to transact would be a lot higher, but there's
Yep.
13. But my realistic take on it is that unless those things change, unless there is avenues for entrepreneurial businesses to get into a lot of these states, like the barriers to entry are so high, there may not ever be, look at New York, there may not ever be an innovative sports book that ever gets there because the costs are too high. So unfortunately, like a lot of these states, like the cost just doesn't support any, and if any, like
Yeah.
sometimes only one.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a bummer. And I know that's been a frustration for you and for me, because it's like, my God, can we let the people who actually know how to book bets actually start books instead of like these massive conglomerate, like run by marketers and consultants. It's but they have the money, so it's like, all right, well, I guess we have to have DraftKings again, no matter what, even though they, they're not, I don't think they're very innovative on a trading or pricing standpoint, but, or very robust, but it's like, that's what we get. Are you now, this is an interesting thought experiment. I think we talked about this offline when we first talked, but it's like, do you see a future, because you're the way you're describing Sporttrade, right? Like, it's in a technology company. It's not necessarily exchange, because you have two sets of customers. You have institutional customers, which are your market
Mhm.
makers, and then you have your, the counterparties, which are going to be the retail customers, which could be Sharp, which could be Square, right? But they're all bucketed into that. They're usually taking liquidity instead of posting. The market makers are posting two different products. So what's to stop, you saying, saying to Circa, hey, be a market maker, plug in if you want, or like to, routing orders. I think you mentioned it just earlier, like routing orders to and from these books and being more of that intermediary instead of, being an operator. You're just
Mhm.
giving your technology to a new customer on the institutional side.
That's a super interesting business to me. Like I am a big fan of the app Picket.
Yep.
There's others out there. There's Juice Reel um, and others that sort of have this service. But I think Picket is head and shoulders to the point where it has the legitimacy. Again, you sort of go back to that user, like Face ID,
Yep.
clean, easy, white space, simple
Yeah.
logos, spacing, just sort of hard to describe and write down on paper, but you know when you see it.
Pickett's nice. Yeah.
Picket's great. I know Anthony pretty well. He's the CEO at Picket,
Yeah,
and
he responds to texts on questions. Is that him, or is that like their other? Because like, I remember I had a question about Pickett and they like texted me. I was like, wow,
yeah,
that's good customer service. I had not a sponsor, just shout out Pickett.
Pickett's great. Businesses that text you are like, I'm especially because they have so many more players than us, so many more active, users. I mean,
Yep.
we're in adjacent sort of businesses, but I think it would be wonderful for there to world where, Picket can not only route orders to different books. And again, this is going to be so hard because there's so many entrenched interests and like the sort of the metaphor is like so many hands in that cookie jar that sort of like what
Yes.
Sportster wants to do is cut off all the hands.
Yeah.
To be very, very
Is
clear, I just
that
want to
how's
cut them
that?
all off.
Is it does it make you very popular?
I think it's like
To us, it does, but to the hands, you're less
the
popular to the
hands.
hands.
Yeah, it's true, but it's true, but it comes from a place of like love and respect for the
Totally.
customer, not of like sport trade. Has is very little to do with sport trade. Like this example of like Picket, maybe even like the dream is like how great would this be? You create your account on Picket, you fund your account on Picket, you
Yeah.
place orders, and Picket sort of handles the best execution for you, and that's for the main
Total
market.
dream.
Right. And then when there's like edges and smaller things that are hard to map the ref data across books, you can,
Right.
use that balance and go into the books and rewards programs and all these sort of things. Like that would be amazing. And where Sport Trade would sit in something like that would be in the execution a lot of those things because we think market
Yeah.
makers competing on price can beat the spread of any other bookmaker. And then ancillarily sort of selling our data or giving our data to books. We have individuals that purchase our data that are really interested in the full depth of book, the top of book, the time in sales, mapping that with what the game state data is and back testing models. Like there's
Yeah.
so much more that Sport Trade
How
is other
much?
than a transaction business.
How much does that cost? Are you allowed to say?
We ended up like there's a lot of
Just
people
make
that
you make it on an individual basis. I don't want to
right.
put you
Yeah,
on
we
the
make it
spot.
an
But I think
just
that's a
because
great service. I'm interested.
right,
No doubt.
right,
Especially now that you have golf. Now you
yeah,
said
and,
something there
and
I thought was interesting
mhm,
was that a market I don't know if you mean your market makers or not, or like because there's other market makers in sports betting that aren't on exchanges. Like
yep,
Chris, Pinnacle, Circa,
yep,
Prime, they're all market makers technically. Like they they are, right? They trade
yep,
action, they take
so
action, they move prices based on their opinion and their comfort and their risk. Now, I agree that market makers are always going to be the sharpest, right? Because you get all the information from all the sharp bettors and whatnot. Now, do you think that you like where you see your market makers, are they seeing the order flow that you think is making? Because I'm actually curious, like where Sport Trade sits in what I would call like the sharp rankings. Like, do you see them getting enough order flow that would make them comparable to like a Circa or Penny or Chris yet? Or, it's harder because you're just in like a couple states now, where, or they, how are they, how do they feel about kind of their pricing? Because they're offering crazy tight spreads. So I'm
yeah,
like, I don't think I would be willing to open myself up to that challenge unless I was getting a decent amount of orders.
right, yeah. I think it's just like take you as a better. Someone could ask you, "Are you a sharp better?" And to which you would say yes, but there's a spectrum, right? If you
Sure.
had a price like in play, will there be a run in this inning? You might be less confident to do that versus like golf, you're just going to be sharp across the board, right?
Right.
Well, when market makers sign up for Sport Trade, they don't get a choice. They
It's
quote
terrifying, man.
everything,
It's terrifying.
and not only do they quote everything, they have no idea. They can't say I don't want to play. Yeah, I'm going to limit this player.
Right.
We don't even have that with our technology. They get
Right.
filled, and they take that sort of what we call anonymous order flow. I just
No,
got
it's
filled.
anonymous. So they just
Anonymous
say
meaning
it's anonymous. So their only indication of if it's sharp is size.
is size. Yep. And then
Wow.
after the fact, T plus one, we give a non-identifying UUID where
Yeah.
like user X might be like 123, but like that can't be
Yeah.
mapped to anything
Sure.
identifiable about the
Like
person. Just
personal information, but it's a
right.
consistent tag.
And that
So they
allows
can
them
go
after
back
the
and be
fact.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
like, okay, maybe they were playing like, oh, they bet this is someone who's smart. Why'd they bet this? Oh, they bet it because I didn't realize it, but the coach like sat so and so.
Yes, yes. They'll look
Okay.
at late in the second half of a college football game and got fill, and make a mental note. I'm going to look at the trade logs
Yep.
tomorrow. Look
Yep.
at the trade logs and be like, what did I miss? Oh, this they have a new offensive coordinator, and I had mapped the whole model to the fact
Yep.
that the older offensive coordinator just doesn't tend to play aggressively in the last 2 minutes when the ball's between the 40 and 40 yard
Yep.
line, like that level
Totally.
of, which
I
helps them,
love
and that's
that.
great, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a fair thing between customers and the players, like
I
I'm
agree.
giving you
That's fair.
information and
I didn't know
right.
that. I love
Yeah.
that. Such a great
Yeah.
interaction because it's it's a pleasant interaction between two people who are trying to do a good job. The sharp's
Right.
trying to do a good job, price the game, and the market maker has less information than even Chris Circa, Penny,
Right.
obviously have player information, and I love those books, great books, but
Yep.
it's even like more pro player. And then they go back the next day and they tweak it and they try and do a good job. And that's I think that is such a
Yep.
good way for the industry to operate. Just
I
try and
think
do a
it's
good
it's right.
job.
It's a fair trade. Like
Yeah.
you get full, basically indiscriminate treatment on the way in. And
Yep.
once that's happened after the fact, they're gonna understand who that is. But again, I think it's just more this realistic take that if we really discriminated order flow, like the fact is, like, people are smart, they're just going to use their sister's account, right? So like
Totally.
you're just sort of creating a problem for Arpita, who's our
Yeah.
wonderful chief compliance officer. She's
Yep.
incredible. The amount of automation she's built, like, we're a very small team, and we have to be a small team because we want to keep costs down. But you're creating more headaches for, for compliance. But the answer to your question, like, it's just so different, and we're having a lot of fun. Like, and I enjoy the challenge of educating players, because you could say, well, Circa's taking, 20,000 on this game. And it's like, okay, yeah,
Right.
but it's minus 110, minus 110. We might be minus 104, minus 104, including commission.
Right.
And so the great thing about that is that for the smaller players, they get an even better price. And if you're a bigger player, you're going to eat up multiple what are called order levels. So you might
Yep.
eat up the
Yeah. Yeah.
2,000 available at minus 104, and then 4,000
Yeah.
available at minus 106. And you're 25,000.
Can you market order?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, there's a
So
really nifty UI where, like, it actually
yeah.
just, I'll send you a video, but like and if maybe we'll release it after, once this is released, but
Yeah.
like we'll actually show you visually what order levels you're going to interact with, and then
Yeah.
even show you a projected volume weighted average price. So that
Yeah.
same example where you want to bet 10,000 and you
Yeah.
might interact with minus 04, minus 06, and minus 108, it sort
Yeah.
of shows you, we think you're going to get minus 106, and then you press the button, and then instantaneously you get
Boom.
one volume weighted average fill, and it says minus 106. So as Spanky likes to say, like a price without a limit, it's like a house, knowing a house without the neighborhood. Like for us, it's
Yep.
like
That's a good quote.
challenging that player to think more about, when it Circa's got 20,000, you've got 3,000, you're not as liquid. So hold on, let's look at the price.
Right.
Minus a four, minus a four, there might be minus 110, minus 110. And there's price levels between those two things that
Yeah.
allow different complexions of players to still get a better fill. And that
That's a good
exclusion
point.
is in play as well. Yeah.
Because you could have more liquidity in front of minus 110 than Circa. So it's
Right.
like actually you have more, if you're thinking Circa at minus 110, you could have 20 at, minus 107, even if
Right.
the click is minus 104. And I
Right.
did want to clarify, because actually, like, most people who watch are, just straight sports betting background. But a market order, if you haven't kind of messed around with trading, is you say, I want this amount, and I'm just going to click a button and get it. And usually, like, it will be like, okay, if you want 1,000 at $1, or if you want to buy 1,000 of a stock that's $1, but there's only like $100 that you can buy at $1, then $100 you can buy $1.01 and whatnot. It basically just keeps buying up the ladder of prices until you get the number of shares you want. So what Alex is talking about is essentially like telling the user, hey, if you were to market order right now, this looks like your average price for
Yes.
your entire order of shares. So then you could go compare it with Circa, because Circa is saying you could take 20 grand at minus 110. With this market order tool, you could take 20 grand and you could see what Sporttrade's price is for 20 grand on that side. And it could be better, So I think that's really an important visualization to connect the trading and the betting world, because that's like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's got to be one of the biggest hurdles. Like, someone like me, I started in trading, so Sporttrade intuitively makes sense to me. But I'm sure there's people in the space who came just from sports betting, where you're
Yes.
trying to like mesh the world. Like, how is that going? How, what's been the challenges? What's been the successes of that?
I think the successes have been the execution quality, meaning
Yes.
like, oh wow, like, and we have a lot of players that we call it like, it's like a verb to us, VWAPing. Like when
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
time we look at the trade ledger, and it's all of our ticks are like, $50, which is plus 100, 50.5, which is minus 102, 51, 51.5,
Yeah.
52, 52 point, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we see a trade that comes in at 52.3, we know that that's an order that is a market order to crest
Yep.
against multiple price levels, and it got one VWAP fill. I think the things we've learned is, like, we had this very heavy, like, reliance on the 0 to 100 model, and we've since sort of
Yep.
taken a step back from that and allowed you to view everything in American odds.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and interesting, like our players that get started and really like it, they switch over to this view where you can sort of see
For
both
sure.
at the same time, which is really really cool. And then like explaining sort of those Sport Trade 201 features of like go back to that Circa example where we might
Yep.
be minus 104, minus 104 for 2000 on Sporttrade, you can do what's called rest an order, and that
Yep.
is like you can ask for whatever price you want. So you could say, I want 10,000. It's offered as 2,000 available at minus 104. I don't want to do a market order and pay more than minus 104. I want to pay minus 104, please. And you place a limit order, and 2,000 gets filled. So now you got 2,000 at minus 104, and
Yep.
8,000 rests. And the
Right.
cool thing about that is you let that rest for a minute at a time. It allows the market makers to take the fill, look around the world, look at where Penny, Circa, Chris, all these venues
Yeah.
are, and then sort, what, we're going to take the rest of this out and get the rest of your. And now you've used a little bit of wit, a little bit of patience, and you've leveraged sport trade technology to end up getting a price that forget it getting minus 106 versus minus 110. Now you've gotten the whole bet at minus 104 versus
Yep.
minus 110. And the really great thing about those limit orders is the more of those limit orders happen, the more you increase the probability for a patron limit order to match a patron limit order, which back to the beginning founding
I
thesis
was
of sport
wondering.
trade,
Yeah.
where if people could say, hey, the midpoint of this market's plus 100, somebody rusts a plus 100 order, and now that market just tightened up from minus 04 and minus 04 to minus 04 and plus 100. And now you come in on the other side and you take the plus 100. We've just facilitated a trade that legitimately is at fair
No
value.
market maker. Yeah.
Right.
Too.
Yeah. Yeah.
How
So
much?
it's an experience. It's an experience.
How much liquidity providing are you seeing? Are you seeing? I'm more interested, actually. I think in the sharps in this circumstance. Are you seeing sharp customers post liquidity?
Yes. I think sort of a very interesting time to ask the question because we're about to roll out like three really cool things that are going to encourage more resting liquidity because it's going to give you the price protection. And without getting into too much detail,
Sure. Yeah.
you know, because it will bog the listener down who's like, wait, sport trade exchange, like I don't know how this works.
Yeah.
But essentially, the main two things are one, you're going to be able to set a time expiry on that order to say, okay, I want
Hmm.
this to be canceled when the game starts, or I want this to be canceled at exactly an hour from now, or really cool and practically, I want this order canceled in 10 seconds. Okay, so now you have the
Yeah.
protection of time because if the
Yeah.
market moves against you, people think, well, you're going to get ripped off. Okay, that gets to
Right.
point two. Now this is where sport trade really goes into overdrive, hits that seventh gear, and now is no longer sort of an exchange as people think about it. You rest that order at plus 100 for $8,000,
Yeah.
and LeBron's out, or it's in play and something's changed and Penny's moved its midpoint and it's at halftime, and now your order appears stale because now the true of the market's minus oh 03, the other way, and you want plus 100. Um, when market makers will start to aggress on that order, it will actually start what's called like a modified auction on demand, where now you can actually get price improvement to say, well, these two market makers both wanted my order. And the traditional sports betting exchange like Betfair
Yep.
world, it was the first one to pick me off. Well, I'm not happy about that. And now
Yep.
Betfair's created a speed race with its biggest market makers. What Sporttrade does is says, you know what, market makers, that's a stale order. You know it, and I know it. So you're now going to have to compete on price. I'll give the guy plus 102. I'll give the guy plus 103. Guess where the trade goes off? Plus 103. So
Yep.
now we've introduced these
That's
two things
crazy.
of the protection of time and protection of price. And that is the example of Sport Trade being a technology company to connect
Yes.
players with the best markets in the world. And that's when people think of exchange, they go right to you're going to have stale limit orders and people are going to get picked off and play. And it's like, just encouraging players to think open-minded about what sport trade is and is it and that's the thing I love most about my job is like these market microstructure questions and
Yeah.
building the technology and work. And again, going back to that founding thesis, remember that the market makers are in on creating this great environment. And
Right.
so they may think that true is minus is plus, you know, oh 04 on something, and they're going to willing to get you plus oh 03, and that's better for them than giving you plus 100. Why? Because if you rest an order at plus 100 and then your fill later at plus oh 03, and then you see the midpoint when you log in to see you got your fill at plus oh 04, you have that more inclination to do resting limit orders because you have that
Totally.
protection, and we want to create that environment. So you asked that question at a very interesting time because we're starting to roll these things out, and like initial look that like customers have like been floored of like, what? Like I could leave a golf market out
Yeah.
and I bogeys the first hole, like it'll shift the price of my limit order.
Yeah.
Yeah, these
That's
sort of things.
bananas. I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. And it's not only to your point on the technology company, it's to your, I mean, it's just like a clear track record of pro customer, in my opinion.
Yep.
Because like I'll pick on someone besides, no, I'll pick on DraftKings again. Because what would DraftKings do? They would obviously just take the plus 100. Like, no, I think we
Right.
all know that. And it's like, could you imagine the goodwill that that customer feels? Not only just feels like they're willing to place limit orders, but just like feels like in general, in the grand scheme of interacting with sports trade or sport betting, that they're not getting their faces ripped off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I love it, and I know we can end there, but I hope we have, because we hit the hour, but I hope we have more conversations. But I want to give you the floor uh, to just, I don't know. I mean, clearly we talked all about the new products or whatnot, but what states are you in? What do you have to say to people listening who are afraid to hop onto the platform or might not have hopped on yet? Like,
Yep.
give the floor is yours.
Great. And thanks so much for having me. This is wonderful, and looking forward to seeing it some of the events this year, and
Yeah, yeah,
getting your feedback on some of the new stuff we want to build. We are in New
definitely.
Jersey and Colorado. We are coming to new states here in 2024,
Let's go.
which is exciting. And you can find us on Twitter at sporttrade_app. We're on the App Store. We're on the Android Google Play Store. Like if you're like wanting to hop in or have any questions, just send me a DM. Um, at a_Kane47 on Twitter. And when this pod
Yeah,
gets
I'll
out, like I'll
post
be
all
the
your
first.
links.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll be the first to comment below. Like I'll even put our phone number there. Send us a
yeah,
text. Like yeah, even if you're not in one of those states and just want to talk shop, like I love doing it. So that's the call to action is like just check us out.
totally. Give them a shot. I mean, Alex truly is like one of the, like, truly you're one of the good guys in this industry, and I think you have so many people rooting for you, uh, myself included. So, I'm so happy to have you on, and thanks for coming on. But like also just to do more stuff with you, just for the benefit of everybody, because I think that you're you're doing the thing by the industry. I love this industry, so I'm there. If you have any any asks, like, let me know. I'm open. My calendar is open for you, and yeah, I'm excited to see you at some more events. Have you back on? I was actually thinking of maybe doing like a round table with, like, maybe you and like Jeff and this guy Brett Johnson, if you follow him over at Hot Streak, who's
Yeah.
responsive to customers and is doing things the right way. Maybe like a little uh, good operator, the approved operator discussion. So we'll see. We'll get some more content out there. But thanks again for joining, and everybody who's watching. I'll post all of the links that Alex just said in the comments. And please give Sport Trade a try. Share the episode. It would be really beneficial to the industry if we saw this take off. So everyone, give us a share. Give Sport Trade a deposit, and I will see you guys on the next episode.